1829 was when it was built.
That is crazy.
I know, and I don't even understand how they did it. It must have been like wood heat that was centrally pumped. I don't understand how it worked. It was magic.
It was magic.
Yeah. So as time went on, as the using the solitary confinement as a way of penitence and reforming people, debates started happening between the public of the effectiveness of solitary confinement on reforming people, and maybe even the compassion. Like, your whole goal of this was so no more corporal punishment, and we would change society and not be so barbaric or whatever. But you're kind of... Charles Dickens went and visited it in 1842, and he said that isolation was worse than torture of the body. He's like, you are doing more harm to these people than you were when you were doing corporal punishment. And he described it as like being buried alive in pure torture. That the way they were contained in cells was not something a human could.
I don't think they were allowed to talk either, were they?
No.
So it's like, how did your voice get all rusty?
I know. So he did not agree with it. And in 1930s, Eastern State gave up on isolation and penitence as a way of reforming, mostly under their own lofty morals. Like, their way of thinking was just too big for what...
Right.
It wasn't going to accomplish what they wanted. And Philadelphia was growing like crazy. But you have more people, more crime, more prisoners. So they needed more room, so they couldn't have isolation anymore.
This huge building, and they only can fit in a finite amount of prisoners because they are all separate from each other.
So it was originally built to hold 300 prisoners. And by 1920, so this was, it was built in 1829. By 1920, it housed 2,000.
Wow.
More cells were constructed, including some that are below ground that did not have any light or plumbing or heat. This is where we started changing from solitude as a form of reflection and enlightenment to punishment. So they're starting to turn this from now solitude is okay. If you do something wrong, you're going to the hole, and they still do this today. Obviously, we all know that. If you watch any kind of TV show, documentary, if you've been, solitary is a thing.
Watched Slaughter SVU at least once.
Yes, or you've watched Orange is the New Black. You go into the solitude, the hole, and this is where the term "the hole" comes from.
It's a dark hole. Nothing.
Yeah. So even though the reformed plan by the Pennsylvania system was what they called this, the Pennsylvania system was what the solitary was that no corporal punishment would happen on the grounds. Guards and consulars designed physical and psychological torture to happen here within the walls of Eastern State. They were like, no corporal punishment, but we're still doing corporal punishment. And in the worst possible ways. So, like I said, they weren't supposed to talk. And there was a silence rule. And if you didn't follow the silence rule...
Even after it wasn't...
For a little bit, yeah.
Even when they were all together
there was no talking, no humming. And if they did not, they'd have their hands bound behind their back and a chain attached to their arms that went to a clamp that was on their tongue and their mouth. That if they moved or tried to fight it, would tear their tongue and cause it to...
Ugh.
Yeah.
That's awful.
They also did...
I would have no tongue.
I would have no tongue left.
Because
I can't shut up, and I wouldn't be able to stand it. And I'll post a picture of what that thing looked like.
I'm kind of a fidgety person. So
yeah. I can't sit still.
How can you stand still and not talk?
Right. With your... Oh, my God. Awful. So then another form of torture they did was called water baths, where they would take an inmate and douse them with water outside during the winter months, and then hang them on the wall, or bind them to the wall, or chain them to the wall, until ice formed on their skin. Yeah. And then there was something called the mad chair. They would bind the inmate tightly until circulation was cut off. It could be for days. And some of them, when they got let go, the ones that did the worst, maybe the most naughty ones, had to sit longer in this chair. They would be permanently crippled when they got out. It would be so bad, because they were
have dead limbs. That
dead.
Had no circulation.
Exactly.
Don't you know what science?
Well,
you don't do that. Then you have to amputate your hands and feet because they don't have any feeling. They haven't had blood flow to them.
No kidding.
That's awful.
Underneath, because now they have built lots more cell blocks to fit lots more people, right? So they started with 7. Now there's 14. Underneath the cell block 14 was an underground cell called the Hole. Inmates would be locked in here for sometimes weeks. There's no light, no human contact, nothing, and you only got bread and water. So depending on what you did to get in there is how long you'd be in there.
Awful.
Yeah. In 1933, a riot occurred. Inmates, so when they started making the cells bigger, they made more workshops. And they started doing things where there was like some group sports stuff they could do, like baseball and stuff that they're allowing the inmates to do together, like congregate. But they removed the outside areas, like the exercise areas, and made them into workshops. So they were working like doing the honest work, honest labor. Because they spent a lot of time idle, they were pissed. They were like, we want to get outside. We want to have fresh air. And so they rioted and they started fires in their cells.
Jeez.
And then a year later, it happened again. This time, because of their low wages, they were getting to do the work they were doing. They weren't getting hardly anything. They short-circuited the electrical outlets that were in there. This is 1934, so there was electricity. And started fires again. In 1945, 12 men escaped through a 97-foot length tunnel underneath the prison.
97 feet long?
Yes.
Oh, my God.
But
where do you put the dirt for something like that?
I don't know. It took over a year for it to get dug. And they were captured almost immediately in return.
Seems like a lot of work for
low,
yeah.
You
get a lot of payback from that.
So in 1959, a new cell block was built. And this is the last one that was built on. And this was to house the violent criminals, like the really bad people. It was the only one that had electric doors. So now we have technology coming into play that we didn't have before. And this part of it, because they were super violent, they wanted the electric doors. And inmates and the guards barely were in contact with each other. They stayed inside the locked stuff. They stayed outside. They had a catwalk where they could observe them, but they didn't intermingle with the violent criminals. In 1961, John Klausenberg tricked the guards to open up another person's cell. And when he did that, they overpowered the guard and started the largest riot in the prison history. It took several hours for the police, guards, and state troopers to gain back control. So it just kept happening, riots after riot, because we have overpopulation. We have people, criminals maybe, sitting around idle. They're bored.
Yeah.
They don't have anything to do. There's too many in there now. And they can't control them. These corporal punishments aren't enough. It's not going to work because you have more inmates than you can control.
Right.
With the riots and the overcrowding. And then also, so they opened in 1829. This is like the end of the 60s. The jail's starting to deteriorate and they're not putting a lot of money into it.
Right.
So in 1970, or in January 1970, they decided to close their doors, and the prisoners were sent to the State Correctional Institute in Gatorford, which that's in Pennsylvania. For a little bit, it opened back its doors back up again because there was a riot in another prison in Holmesburg, but they were only held there until they could get them back into the thing.
Right.
So
I'm sure
then,
it was very unpleasant, though.
It couldn't have been good because it must have been like the doors had been closed for a year. No one had been in there, and they throw these. It had been awful in there when they got put in there. Over its 142-year history, it had 75,000 inmates, including Al Capone, who spent, I think it was 1929 to 1930. He was there 8 months because of a concealed weapons charge. But his cell, everyone else's cells were really just a bed and a toilet, like that's all you got. He probably had it in, Al Capone. He got to have furnishings. He had paintings, a lamp, and a cabinet radio that he could listen to. So he had it pretty good.
I think they still have his cell.
They sure do. They do. Another famous inmate was the infamous bank robber Willie Sutton. 100 inmates escaped. All but one were captured. And for the life of me, I realized I didn't write it down, and I can't remember the name of the guy. But that's pretty good odds, though.
Yeah,
they got most of them, 99 back out of the 100 that escaped, like actual escape, got out of the walls. 2 guards and many inmates were murdered during 2 years that it was open. Others committed suicide basically driven mad by the isolation or the terrible punishments. Solitary confinement is the worst thing you can do to a person. And we know this, and we still do it to today because we think that's going to help people. It's just breaking them in a bad way.
And what they're doing, it's like the ultimate like punishment. So they're using it more as a deterrent. Like, if you do that, you're going in solitary confinement, so you won't do it again. Well,
but they end up back again.
Yeah.
And a lot of times when they're in there, the longer they're in there, the more broken they become. And it's not broken as, we broke their spirit. It's like broken as mentally. And that's not going to be good for anyone. Obviously lots of people died of disease because, it was the 1800s when it started and everyone was dying of something back then.
I know.
And then old age because people ended up living their lives there. In 1965, it was named a historical landmark, but it was abandoned still. So no one was in it. And it got really vandalized. But in 1994, the Penn Prison Society opened its doors for tours and special events. So to this day, you can tour and see it.
Married at this prison.
You can. People have.
I
forgot to say that
that's not my idea of a fun wedding.
I think that'd be fun, actually. I would do it. I like it.
Although this is from a girl who went to Salem, Massachusetts on her honeymoon because that's how I roll.
I love that. So I forgot to say that one cell block where they put the violent criminals was actually death row, and they were on there, but no one was actually executed in that building. They just held them until they got executed, and they were sent somewhere else to get executed. So that violent cell block had death row, was called death row. I forgot to say that back when I talked about it.
Yes.
So it's said that the Eastern State Penitentiary is the most haunted prison in the U.S., and some even argue one of the haunted places in the United States.
Ooh.
It's been featured on several ghost paranormal shows, obviously. Staff and visitors have shared paranormal activity, sightings of ghosts, and this dates back early, like to Al Capone time when he was in there. He said while he was there, he was haunted by James Clark, who was a victim of the St. Valentine's Day Massacre, and has said that he would scream every night, "Jimmy, go away." So he was haunted by him, but he also kind of lost his mind later in life, and he also was haunted from him forever. So it wasn't necessarily there because he was there that he was haunted by Jimmy, but that's the earliest you hear about ghosts. Yeah. In the 40s, prison guards started talking about seeing shadows moving around and unexplained noises that they were like, well, all this stuff is happening. They're getting creeped. But again, you're in a place that had horrible things happen. Apparently today in cell block 12, there's a lot of paranormal activity happening. You hear cackling. I would die.
I would die too.
No.
No thanks. That's like the worst.
I don't want to hear cackling.
No.
I mean, I cackle, but I'm okay with my own.
I don't want a ghost cackling because it's so sinister.
That's not a good thing.
No, it's like they're cackling because they're going to try to kill you
exactly.
or something. It's like, no thanks.
They hear whispers and...
That's bad too. I don't like whispers.
Yeah, I don't either. Cell block 6, there's a shadowy figures that can be seen sliding along the walls. Ew.
No thanks.
Also, he'll hear screams and laughter. No!
Mm-mm.
Cell block 4, number 4, there's reports of an anguished ghost faces and loud whispers.
Well, they weren't allowed to talk, so...
No.
The whispering makes sense.
In the 1990s, Gary Johnson was a locksmith who was working on cell block 4, one of the cells there, and he was removing an old lock from the cell door, and he all of a sudden felt as if he was overcome by a massive force. He was unable to speak or move, and he saw distorted forms swirling around the cell block, and one was beckoning for him to come with him.
No.
And then all of a sudden it stopped.
That's terrifying.
No, thank you.
That's terrifying.
I would be like, okay, here's my resignation today. I will not be working for you any longer.
Yep. The whispering makes me think, like, I will say, though, like, anybody out there who watches Walking Dead, the whisperers are, like, the worst bad guys.
Oh.
They're creepy as shit, and they whisper, and it's terrifying.
I don't like it.
I didn't like it either.
People also report seeing a guard silhouette in one of the watchtowers. Now, the prison isn't there's no guards in the prison. Obviously, it's not open as a prison anymore, so there is no guards up there, but you can see a silhouette sometimes of a guard standing in the guard tower. Another place with a lot of paranormal activity is the catwalk, where they observed, like, the guards would walk across to see all the inmates. Shadowy